Hyvä huomenta. Kiitos. Kipis. That is the extent of my Finnish. Until you started speaking in English, of course, I was desperately trying to keep up, but failing miserably. So firstly, kiitos that you all speak English so well that I can come to your country and speak in English, and I don't have to do this in Finnish, because that makes it much easier for me. And kiitos for having me, because this is a fascinating topic. I do a lot of work with different companies around the world, and the thing about food, of course, is it touches everybody. It literally, and I think with a company like S Group, it touches everybody in the country. Is that right? Who in Finland hasn't ever bought something from S Group? So this to me, makes it exciting to be here, and the topic is fascinating. So I run a small business called The Future is Here. We are futurists. What we do is we help people understand the future so that what they do today can be more relevant. What we're looking at, my Twitter handle, if anybody uses Twitter. What we're looking at today is the future of food. To cover the future of food in 30 minutes is quite a lot to do. So what I'm hoping to give you here is what I think are the most important ingredients that should inspire you and inform you in terms of what you do as a business, what you think of as a person, in terms of the most important aspects of the future of food. So briefly, what we'll do is why I bother doing this, why I really find this compelling and interesting as a job, and why I think it's interesting for you guys to understand and think about the future of food, how we do this. Has anybody here been to a trend presentation before? I mean, I have, so I should put my hand up. Okay, a few of you. Have you sometimes come away thinking, they just made that up? You know that feeling? Or you come away thinking, they just made up those words. I have got a few made-up words here, but that's my business. But I'm going to just a brief explanation of how it works. Then we'll look at the factors, and the factors are the things that make the trends relevant. They're what exists in society. You can think of Michael Porter's pest analysis, political, economic, socio-cultural, and technological as a starting point here. You can think of it in terms of, if you were to think of a trend as a seed that you plant in the ground, the factors of the soil that it grows in. So if the soil is no good, the trend will not grow. If the soil is good and appropriate for that trend, it will grow. And then we'll look at a toolkit. Now, if you were building a farm or a bathroom or a home, you would use a set of tools. And I like to close these presentations, thinking about if you were reimagining your food business, if you were reimagining the food business here in Finland, what would be the tools that you take with you in your kit bag that you could take out and say, I'm going to use this here? Does that make sense? My wife sometimes says the toolkit thing is a ridiculous idea, but I think it makes sense. So somebody nod at me and I'll kind of carry on. Thank you. Okay, so why we bother doing forecasting? Do you know this guy, Wayne Gretzky? A good hockey, and you know this quote, I imagine. A good hockey player plays where the puck is, and a great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be. Now, Wayne Gretzky wasn't particularly big, he wasn't particularly fast, but this is why he was good. And I think that businesses and people, to an extent, but people who think about what's next and play towards that rather than what's here right now are the ones who survive and thrive. And this is why this is relevant. This is something called the Social Development Index. And it was created by a guy called Ian Morris, who's at Stanford University. And it probably makes a little bit of sense on its own, but just a brief explanation. So on the y-axis, the one going up and down, is social development. And that's the ability of humans to get things done. It doesn't have a particularly moralistic perspective on it, but it's our ability to, it's the move from horses to cars is a really great example. That shift from being able to get things done quicker. And then you can see the dates here. This is 14,000 years ago. Between there and 10,000 years ago was the invention of farming. And you can see that for most of human society, we went up very slowly. You'll notice that y-axis is logarithmic. It goes from 10 to 100 to 1,000. And the reason for that is if it wasn't logarithmic, you would never be able to get on that graph where we are today in 2000. The important bit to notice, really, is that from about 1760, the graph has gone like that. And this is why understanding the future is more important today than it's ever been because things change much faster than ever. I'm going back. So that's why understanding the future is so crucial today. And so how we forecast. So we're inspired by this statement the guy called William Gibson, a futurist and novelist, said back in the early 80s. The future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed. I think of Mumbai as a great example of this. You can go to Mumbai, you can live a very 21st century existence in parts of Mumbai, and then within half an hour you can be in a place where there's an elephant carrying trees along the road. Now, that idea, there's different times existing in the same time in terms of geography. Does that make sense? Yeah, we've got, South Korea had 5G. They don't have a word, I think, for download anymore. So this is how we work. We use this thing called the diffusion of innovations curve. This informs how we work. What we do is we understand the innovation, the seed that goes into the ground. Then we look at the macro environmental factors. This is the ground itself. Technological changes, environmental changes, demographic changes. And we use this thing called the diffusion of innovations curve. This was first codified in 1962 by a guy called Everett Rogers. It's been applied more than 5,000 times since then. And what it does is it describes how ideas spread through any human community. It could be the take-up of firearms by American Indians in the West. It could be the take-up of new seeds that are drought-resistant. It could be the take-up of doctors using particular types of drugs. Now, if you've not seen this before, you will understand it pretty quickly from actually this bit here, the early adopters. So on the y-axis, going up and down, this is take-up. It can be percent, it can be numbers. On the flat one, we're looking at time. So we start with the first people that do something are the innovators. They're the crazies. You know those friends who will go to the latest French, Vietnamese, Ethiopian fusion restaurant? You know those people? Those are the foodie innovators. And then there's the other people who would wait until someone else has been there, the early adopters. You've heard this phrase, the early adopters, right? And this also works in terms of the take-up of the mobile phone, the smartphone, for instance. And then after the early adopters, you get the early and late majority, and then the laggards. They're the people who only switch their mobile phone on to make an outgoing call. Do you still know people that do that? Okay, you get my point. What's useful about this is once you understand this is how ideas spread through a community, and this is how we work, is we look at what the innovators and the early adopters are doing now to understand what the majority and everybody else is going to be doing later. And I've been using this format since about 2004, and it works. So let's look at the factors. This is the soil, this is the water we're swimming in, this is what makes the trends relevant or not. So everywhere, this is possibly the only completely made-up word in this presentation. Software, hardware, it's everywhere. Computers are everywhere today in a way that they just weren't even 10 years ago. You know, the Internet of Things, I think the tipping point was about 2006, 2007. First of all, we had this, the internet where computers were connected, then we had the internet of people, then the internet of things, and now the internet of cows. This company is trialing using these sensors that are worn by cows to make sure that there's, they track their key vital signs, like how much they've moved. So they watch out for lameness, which can save the cow industry a lot of money, apparently. They're doing some trials at the moment to work out how much. But we're also all connected. How many of you checked email this morning before you cleaned your teeth? Yeah. Isn't that weird? What's wrong with us all? How many of you checked it last night after 10 p.m.? How many of you checked it during the hockey match yesterday? See, that's wrong, isn't it? Can't we stop for a bit to enjoy, the sport that matters? Okay, social world. So because of that, we're all so connected. We're all online the whole time. Facebook has more people than God on this planet and can reach them on a mobile phone. It took the Catholic Church 2,000 odd years to get to 1 billion members. It's taken Facebook less than a decade. Isn't that amazing? This foodie app, have you come across this thing? Launched, I think, about 3-4 weeks ago, and it is designed specifically so that when you take pictures of food, which you shouldn't do, by the way, because you will enjoy your food less, the data shows, but if you do, and we all know people that do, right? You can use this foodie app to make your food look better. You can see the before and after here, right? Okay, the rise of experientialism. So the big problem for humans since the dawn of time, since 150,000 odd years ago when early modern humans existed, was scarcity. So because of that, we were materialistic. And in the 20th century, what happened is we became even more materialistic. In the 21st century, we have abundance. We have obesity as a problem. Imagine telling somebody 100 years ago in 1916 that one of the biggest problems we face today as a species is obesity, not being able to feed everybody. And that has completely changed our value system. We've gone from being materialistic to something I call experientialist.
The experientialists are people who've realised that the best place to find happiness, identity, status and meaning is not in material goods, it's in experiences instead. Status is important for all mammals, it's important for humans just as important for howler monkeys, lions, whatever it might be. In the 20th century, the best way to stand out was through material goods because nobody back then knew what you'd been doing at the weekend unless you specifically went up to each person and told them. But nowadays with Facebook, people do know what you're doing and what you've done. So if you post a picture of you having finished, got through the tough guy, then you will get much more status by the very fact you've done it. You can't stand out through the things that you own, through material things, but you can stand out through experiences, right? So anyone can go out and buy a really fancy watch, a designer handbag or whatever it might be. But not everyone can do the tough guy course because not everyone wants to go in the Viet Cong tunnels and have electricity put through them in the dark where people are screaming. And doing that and going through that process not only helps you stand out to other people and gives you some kind of sense of status in terms of who you are in society, but it really gives you a sense of who you are inside in a way that material goods just don't.
Anybody done one of those things? Come on. There's tough Viking. They do it here. They do it, in this area. This is a real shift. In the States in 2009, 500,000 people took part in one of these obstacle course races. Last year, it was 5 million. Think of that in terms of that diffusion of innovations, in terms of that shift. Think of what that means in terms of how we get status today. Okay, so smart living. Forget E and I as the prefix, it's smart. Smartphones from from launch in 2008 to 1.5 billion of them today. Smart homes, think what Google paid for Nesta. Think about smart cities. Hitachi is working with Copenhagen. IBM is working with Melbourne. This positioning, I saw this thing the other day that Romania wants to have a smart city by 2018. This idea that we can, I think this is belief in better. That idea that, came from a couple of hundred years ago. This changed from the belief that things were getting worse, this belief that things were getting better. And I think it's something that we really embrace today. Who remembers this telephone? Who had one? Who thought it was the coolest thing ever? I couldn't believe how cool that phone was. I think it's better than the iPhone. But this is where we've come to today, Amazon's Echo. You say to this thing, Alexa, and it's got 7 microphones. It can hear you even when it's playing music. Alexa, add spaghetti to my shopping list, and it does it. Alexa, what's the weather going to be like today? This device is amazing. We are living much smarter. Carbon concern, the COP21 agreements, what's amazing about them is that very soon we're going to have to start reducing our carbon footprint as a species as quickly as we were increasing our carbon footprint. And by 2070, we have to become a carbon sink. I don't even know what that means. I can't even imagine what that looks like. But human beings, if we get to hit this 2 degrees rise by 2100, I'll be dead by then, I don't really care. That's not true. I'd like my children to have a pleasant place to live. But by 2070, we have to be positive, not negative. Is anybody else here confused by what that means and what that's going to look like for our existence? It's going to mean a lot more solar, isn't it? So we have people like this woman appearing, these zero waste people. She can fit all her waste for a year in that thing there. They did try out using moss for toilet paper. They gave that up after a while. And here's the things that she has. But this is a little movement of these zero waste people. Okay, so the trends. So Uberization. I toyed with just saying Uber here and just talking about Uber, partly because I wanted to see the looks on your face as you sat there thinking, this is about food. Why are you telling us about a taxi company? But this incredible new business model that says that the world's biggest hotel company doesn't own any hotels, Airbnb. The world's biggest retailer doesn't hold any stock, Alibaba. The world's biggest transportation company, biggest taxi company, doesn't own any taxis. That's revolutionary. This is going to redefine capitalism, because capitalism as a term, what's capitalism in Finnish? Somebody, is it some version of capitalism? Does it sound similar or not? It's the same, okay. So capitalism is defined by taking capital and doing something with it. But we're moving from a time where businesses that are successful are asset light. So there's actually going to be a redefinition of what that means. This is an incredible business model that's affecting the delivery of food in all sorts of ways. And the valuations of some of these businesses, DoorDash worth $600 million, Wolt here in Finland just raised $11 million. I think the guy who set up Skype has invested, Nokia chairman's invested, there's Foodora, which is based out of Berlin, which is, I think, I saw the other day something like $2 or $3 billion valuation. This is big business. Have you all used one of these services? Anybody use one of these services? Great. Can I suggest that you all try and do it in the next week or so? Just to see what it's like. Just to see how it feels. Because this is going to fundamentally change how consumers consume their food. The valuations for these kind of businesses, the ease, convenience, something that I didn't really put into those factors. Convenience is such a strong driver, I think, in everything. We believe in better. Okay, smart eating. So smart living, smart eating. This is everything from packaging. You think about how much we know about the food we eat nowadays. Partly because we have to know about it, because we worry about the antioxidants and the things that are being used in it. But then you've got this thing from Public Health England called the Sugar Smart Scanner. You scan the barcode, use it on your telephone, it's an app, and it tells you how much sugar is in something. So if you had a small glass of orange juice this morning, that's 5 cubes worth of sugar, which if you've got children, that's the maximum a child should have. If they're up to about age of 6, 5 or 6 cubes of sugar is the maximum they should have in a day. So if you give your kid at the weekend a glass of orange juice, they shouldn't have ice cream in the afternoon. Partly saying that to remind myself. I obviously say yes when my daughter makes a fuss. Okay, the diet sensor, this thing you're going to see now, I think is just incredible. That isn't just a concept. That was showed at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, and it's coming out. It's a product, not a prototype. Who here would like one of those things? Yeah, who wouldn't, right? I don't worry about my diet too much. I'm fairly healthy. I play sport. But the idea that I could improve my diet and manage my diet by just pressing that thing and know how many calories I'm having, as I'm now older than 40, I'm going to share this with you. And, once you turn a decade, do you all get this? When you turn a decade, your metabolism changes, doesn't it, right? Anyway, I won't go into my personal issues. But, knowing what you have is important. That thing makes it possible. I think that's where we're headed. Interesting thing is these big companies changing what they offer. Did you come across this example of what Kraft have done with their mac and cheese? This was brilliant. They changed the ingredients. They took out the artificial preservatives, colors, and what other evil stuff they had in it, and they put maybe not completely healthy, but they put natural colours, natural stuff in there. And they didn't tell anybody about it. They did it in December, and what they did was they watched for a reaction. They looked at social media. I don't know if you come across Gizlo. I saw a friend last night who I met in a startup conference. Gizlo is this fantastic product where you can listen in to what people think about your product. And what Kraft is, they listened in and nobody noticed. I mean, they had to change the ingredients on the pack, but nobody noticed. And then they did this announcement in March, say, hey, we changed the ingredients. Turns out you still like it. And now imagine you're a mum. You're an American mum. You buy food. You want your kids to be healthy. But you know what? You like mac and cheese because it's really easy because you're a mum. You're busy. And then it turns out they've been tricking you, but they've made you a better mum. Isn't that awesome? And I think Coca-Cola's pivoting away from sugar. I talked to someone I know at IDEO, the design company, the other day. He didn't say it was Coca-Cola, so that just to be really clear, but there's a company that's approached them, a major food and beverage company, which wants to talk to them about changing the palate of people and working out how they can change people's palate, because our palates, this is globally, has shifted in the past 40, 50 years to become attuned to sweetness much more. I mean, this move away from sugar is going to be fascinating in the next couple of decades. The shift from sweet to savory. We will move into a zero-waste world. Some of the exciting stuff that's being done. I love what's happening in France. And the French, bear in mind, were the first people in 2010 to start measuring well-being. First major country to measure well-being. The French can be quite innovative. They've got this law that's come out this year that stops large supermarkets wasting food. Previously, they were bleaching the food. They now have to compost it or donate it. I love this campaign that these guys did at Intermarché with the ugly fruit. It sold out almost instantly, full rows. Actually, I'm going to come back to the law, because one of the other aspects about the law is that they have to teach kids in schools now about food waste. That's been mandated by law in France. I think that's fantastic to teach the next generation. And there's another aspect of the law that says that in restaurants, they have to offer you a doggy bag. You know a doggy bag? Little container to take your food away. And you think about, I don't know about you, but if you'd said, do you get that feeling sometimes where there's food left over and you want to take it home, but you feel a little bit embarrassed to ask? Or is that just me? Anyone else get that feeling? Yeah? Because you feel it sort of feels weirdly cheap, but it kind of makes sense. And also, there's nice food, you just had enough. Isn't it great that a law is coming out to support people doing that and to support the restaurants doing that so there is less waste? And the guy who's driven that law through in France wants it to be an EU-wide law. This cafe in Melbourne, it's actually closed. He uses the unused meat and seafood bones from other restaurants to make the broth. He stops other people creating waste. Brilliant guy, Joost Bakker. Fascinating. You knew I was going to say something about the new Nordic, didn't you? Or you hoped? Big piece in the Financial Times the other week about the new, what I would call the new Nordic. And this is, they call it the brutal bistros, and I was lucky enough to eat in one last night, Kurna. In some ways, this is the same thing. It's no nonsense, it's no frills, it's local, simple, indigenous, wild. But where it's different, I think, is not only about this idea of these guys, doing their own butchery, curing their own meats, really getting involved in the food and expressing themselves, but it's a new generation of chefs who, they kind of don't care about all the other stuff that doesn't matter. If you go to these places, Bee Smokery, anyone here been to Bee Smokery? So Bee Smokery is a great example. It's kind of just got that raw kind of feel. They don't care about the stuff that doesn't matter. They care about what does matter. And what matters is the food. What matters is producing really interesting food that is well thought out, well created. And I think there's an association with this DIY movement of people to make their own food. I'd be fascinated to hear people's opinions of this, because part of me wonders where about this DIY movement is much more about convenience rather than expressing people's ability to do stuff. I've been covering the future of food since 2004. The first piece of work I ever did on trend analysis was in 2004 on the future of food. And about 5-6 years ago, I remember looking at this new DIY movement. We saw, there was that movement for men to make bread in Sweden. Did you come across that? And there was, we saw people fermenting. And I don't think it really went anywhere for a number of reasons. I think it was just slightly too complex. What's happening here, it's a bit like the meal delivery, but this is meal kit delivery. The magic of this is they've got all sorts of, there's so many different companies doing it. There's Plated, as you can see here. It's worth, I think the most recent round said it was worth $2 or $3 billion. It delivers $100 million of revenue a year. This is a big business that's come out of nowhere in the last few years. Blue Apron is one of its competitors in a company called HelloFresh, and they're all when they raise money, they're raising tens of millions of dollars. These are big businesses. And I think the reason why people care is that we all do that all day, don't we? And I don't know about you, but doing that all day is kind of unsatisfying. I'm not talking about playing the piano. Sorry, that was maybe that's weird. Do most of you work at a computer? Do you ever get to that point where you want to do something? There's an interesting rise in pottery classes in the UK, but people want to do something with their time. I think one of the things that the Industrial Revolution did for us is they especially from a man's perspective, they demand us. And what we do is we push keys all day. And this opportunity to do something, then think about experientialism. Think about that need to tell people who we are, take pictures of our food and say, I can do something. I'm not just a button presser. And these companies make it easy to do that. So here's this lady making her food. The box comes through. She gets the ingredients. Everything's laid out already. It's a bit like having a sous chef at home. I think a lot of these technology things, it's the kind of thing that if you were super wealthy 50, 60 years ago, you didn't need all this technology because, you have Google creating lifestyle management services today. Well, that was called a PA. This was having somebody cook your food for you, but actually this makes it possible for everybody to do it. So everything's laid out, and then you make a lovely meal. The vegetable is the hero. This is big movement away from meat, all sorts of issues with meat. Think about concern for the environment, the cost of meat for the environment, the cost of meat full stop. I also think this is to do with photo first. I mean, in that previous video, you see that what meat looks like in pictures. I don't think it looks as good as vegetables. Think about the colors you can get in vegetables. If you think about people spending their lives on Facebook, on social networks, this becomes more important. I'm speeding up because I'm short of time. If at any point you can't understand me, raise your hand or throw something at me. These guys, this place is doing really well. Vegetables Unleashed, and it's called Beefsteak. How fun is that? They've just raised $9 million. Gwyneth Paltrow's just put money in. And when you look at that, I don't know about you, but I look at that and think, looks like a bunch of vegetables. This place is doing really well. And this movement, the vegetable forward movement. Okay, new world flavors. Who went to Street Helsinki? A few of you. Okay. Really interesting. Pop-ups, food trucks around the world are making it possible, make it easy for entrepreneurs, food entrepreneurs and chefs to try stuff out. Opening a restaurant is an expensive, dangerous endeavor. Opening up a pop-up, it doesn't matter. Also, I think there's a different attitude today. Failing is fine. How many people here think that 20 years ago, failing was considered a bad thing to do? Whereas today, failing is fine. Failing means you've gone out and you've tried something. I love the different flavors that are coming through, particularly at Street Helsinki. Okay, so here's a toolkit. So as hopefully a useful wrap-up for you, I just want you to think about that diffusion of innovations curve. Did you understand that as a basic idea? Because otherwise there's no point in me talking through this. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, so this is where I think about these in terms of where they sit in terms of that curve and how that indicates how long it's going to take to an extent them to reach fruition, but also in terms of where you put your energy and your effort. So let's think about zero waste. Is S Group going to become zero waste overnight? Is any company going to do that? No, because that's crazy. And if you think about consumers, think about yourself, think about the way that you live. Are you going to turn your home into a zero waste home overnight? No, you're not. Probably. But they will influence what the rest of us do. That's another way that these trends happen. But I think that within 10 years, that zero waste movement will become much, much stronger because of the soil that's sitting in, because of our concerns about the environment. If we're going to have any chance to hit this 2-degree rise by 2100, we have to start doing something. Okay, the new Nordic, it's a handful of restaurants. There's this wonderful place called Punk Royale in Stockholm that is touted as one of these. And they have a washing machine in the dining room where you eat. Not just to look nice, but they use it as a washing machine. They're brutal in what they're interested in is serving great food. Sod the rest. That's what counts, good food. I think that will come through in terms of how people think about how they serve it at home as well. What chefs do, what restaurants do, that affects the rest of us. Okay, smart living, smart eating I've put here. Vegetable hero I've put here. I think vegetable hero as an idea, that idea of moving meat off the plate, that moving from, in Britain we have this term meat and two veg, which is kind of how you think about a meal. And it's kind of radical as an idea, but it's something that makes so much sense today. How many of you sometimes think about being vegetarian every now and again? This flexitarian term. Whereas I don't think our parents thought about that, right? That wasn't how things used to be. Flexitarianism is rising. In a country like this, where you've got a lot of space, it's not going to be such a problem. There's lots of fabulous meat that is available. But then there's all those different reasons why vegetables make sense. Smart living, smart eating is going to increase quickly. It's here now, but I was tempted to put it further along that curve. Partly because they're still new, but the costs of these things are low and they're coming to everyone quite quickly. Uberization is way further up the curve. Lots of people doing this already, not everybody. It's really interesting in the room now. I was expecting more people to have tried this out. They've got 400 restaurants in Stockholm, Walt, and they've got, I think, 100,000 users. And then the new DIY of people making their own food and being provided with that. And the one to finish with is this idea of new world flavors. That's very much on the cusp, I think. And the opportunity with all these, be brutal. Focus on what matters, not what doesn't matter. Focus on the food itself. Take inspiration from those businesses, from those restaurants. Create stories. Think about how important it is to yourself to have a story. Think how important it is to people. In the 80s, the way to show off was with a fast car. Today, it's with a good story. And think about that in terms of connecting with people. Be a zero hero. Don't wait for the EU to come in with a law that says that you have to do certain things. Lead. Leading is so important because people care about this. Think about health in terms of vegetables. Think about when somebody puts one of those scanners onto the food that you provide, that you grow, that you sell, what's it going to say to them? Eat more? Or is it going to say, stay away from this, it's evil? Too much sugar, too many antioxidants. Play with flavors. Think about those new world flavors. Excite people about what you're doing. And then toy with technology, and that's my final point. Toy with technology is think about Uber. And I say this because I say it to every client that I work with now. You've got to understand that there is a new business model which is disrupting so many businesses. It will disrupt your business as well. Where do you sit with it? How can you play with technology? How can you understand the platform business model and be a supplier, be a consumer, be the platform and try and play with that model and be relevant tomorrow and not see your industry disrupted and your place in it disrupted as well? That's the future of food. That's our website. Thank you.